What if I told you that the most feared warriors in human history were also some of the most sophisticated healers the world has ever seen? That the same people who crossed uncharted oceans in wooden ships, who raided coastlines from Newfoundland to Constantinople, who built an empire from ice and will, those same people carried a medicine kit so effective that modern pharmacology is still reverse engineering it today. Most people don't know this, but while we picture Vikings as purely destructive forces, the Norse tradition had a deep, precise, and battle-tested knowledge of medicinal plants. They had to. When you are fighting in a shield wall or crossing the North Atlantic, you cannot run to a pharmacy. You need medicine that works immediately, in the field, under the harshest conditions imaginable. And that is exactly what Viking plant medicine delivered. Norse healers called Laknar and the shamanic Volvas maintained precise knowledge of every plant growing across Scandinavia, Iceland, and every territory the Norse explored. Their medicine was not superstition. It was hard-won, survival-grade knowledge. Plants that stopped bleeding on a battlefield. Plants that fought infection before infection killed you. Plants that kept entire communities alive through brutal northern winters. Stick around because number 16 on this list was literally called Viking's Cure in the Old Norse sagas, and modern immunology just confirmed it activates the same pathways as some of the most advanced immune therapies developed in the last decade. And number 20 is the plant that the Volvas considered the most powerful medicine in all 9 worlds of Norse mythology, and clinical trials are now proving they were right about every single use they documented. Make sure you hit that subscribe button because we post new videos every week connecting ancient healing wisdom with modern science. So let's get into it. Here are 20 Viking plants that will heal you instantly. Ranked from remarkable to absolutely legendary. Number 1. Yarrow, the warrior's wound herb. Let's start with the plant that was more important to Viking warriors than almost any weapon they carried. Yarrow, Achillea millefolium. The very name tells you its history, named after Achilles who reportedly used it on his soldiers' wounds. But the Norse were using it on battlefields long before the Greeks and with surgical precision. They called it gullert, and it was the first thing a Viking healer reached for when a warrior came off the field bleeding. Modern clinical research explains exactly why that was the right call. Yarrow contains compounds called achillean with documented hemostatic properties that genuinely accelerate clotting and stop bleeding faster than leaving a wound alone. But yarrow doesn't stop there. Studies confirm it also fights the bacteria most likely to infect battlefield wounds, including Staphylococcus and Streptococcus, while simultaneously reducing the inflammation that turns a wound into a systemic infection. Traditional use was direct. Fresh yarrow leaves were crushed and packed into wounds. Yarrow tea was consumed for fever and internal inflammation. The dried herb was always carried on longships because wounds happened far from home and far from help. Yarrow got sidelined when antiseptics and sutures became standard, but for natural first aid and wound care, the warrior's herb is still as effective as it was in any Norse shield wall. Think of it as the battlefield medicine that warriors trusted their lives to for 1,000 years. Number 2. Elderberry, the shield of the North. Elderberry, Sambucus nigra, was so important in Norse tradition that the elder tree was believed to be protected by a spirit called Hildamor, the Elder Mother. You had to ask her permission before harvesting. This wasn't superstition, it was cultural protection for one of the most critical medicines in the community. You did not casually harvest elder because the community depended on it surviving. Modern immunology has produced some of the most impressive plant medicine research ever conducted on elderberry. Multiple randomized controlled trials show standardized elderberry extract significantly reduces both the duration and severity of influenza. One trial showed flu recovery in 4 days for the elderberry group versus 8 days for placebo. The anthocyanins responsible for the berry's deep purple color are among the most potent antioxidants measured in any food plant, with associated reductions in chronic inflammation and cardiovascular risk markers. Traditional Viking use covered the whole plant. Berries were made into syrups carried through winter. Elder flowers were used for fever and respiratory congestion. Norse healers understood the most important use was preventive, consuming elderberry through autumn to fortify the entire community against the illnesses that killed people in cold, crowded winter quarters. For immune protection, antiviral defense, and antioxidant support, the Shield of the North is still standing. Think of it as the plant that protected Norse communities through 1,000 winters and is still protecting families today. Number 3. Angelica, the plant of the angels. Angelica archangelica, was considered so powerful that it could only have been sent by divine intervention. And in a culture that organized the cosmos around Yggdrasil and the wisdom of the gods, that was the highest endorsement possible. Norse healers used it for respiratory infections, digestive complaints, fever, and as a strengthening tonic for bodies worn down by northern winters. It was one of the primary medicines used during Scandinavian plague outbreaks. Modern phytochemistry reveals why. Angelica root contains furanocoumarins and bitter compounds with documented antimicrobial, anti-inflammatory, and expectorant effects. Research shows genuine activity against respiratory pathogens, antispasmodic effects on the digestive tract, and emerging evidence for adaptogenic properties, the ability to help the body maintain resilience under extreme stress. Exactly the property that made it invaluable to people living at the survival edge of the North Atlantic. Traditional use included Angelica root tea for respiratory illness and exhaustion, and the whole plant as food medicine in Iceland and Greenland, where plant diversity was desperately limited. Angelica got forgotten because it grows in cold, remote habitats far from pharmaceutical development centers. But for respiratory health and overall resilience in harsh conditions, the plant of the angels is still delivering. Think of it as the medicine sent for the hardest conditions imaginable. Number 4. Juniper, the purifier. Juniper, Juniperus communis, grew in the cold, rocky, exposed landscapes where few other medicinal plants survived, which made it indispensable across the entire Norse world. Norse healers used it for urinary infections, respiratory illness, joint inflammation, and as a powerful antimicrobial purifier for wounds and living spaces. Modern research confirms the broad antimicrobial basis for that universal use. Juniper berries and essential oil contain monoterpenes with documented antibacterial, antifungal, and antiviral activity. The diuretic effects on the urinary tract are clinically established, with research showing increased urine flow and clearance of urinary pathogens. Anti-inflammatory research shows juniper extracts inhibit the same COX enzymes targeted by pharmaceutical NSAIDs, directly supporting its traditional use for the joint inflammation that worsens in cold, damp northern climates. Traditional Viking use was comprehensive. Juniper smoke purified living spaces during illness outbreaks. Berry tea treated urinary and digestive infections. The oil was applied topically for joint pain and wounds. Norse healers had a complete antimicrobial toolkit in a single plant that grew everywhere they lived. Important note: juniper should not be used in high amounts during pregnancy. Juniper got dismissed as gin flavoring rather than serious medicine. For urinary health, respiratory antimicrobial support, and natural anti-inflammatory therapy, the purifier of the North is still doing what it always did. Think of it as the plant that kept the Viking world clean when nothing else could. Number 5. Iceland moss, the survival medicine. Iceland moss, Citraria islandica, is not actually a moss, but a lichen, and it is one of the most extraordinary survival medicines in human history. Norse communities in Iceland and Greenland depended on it as both food and medicine when nothing else was available, a dual role that made it uniquely irreplaceable. Modern research reveals why it deserves serious attention. The lichen contains usnic acid with documented activity against tuberculosis bacteria and other respiratory pathogens. It is extraordinarily rich in mucilaginous polysaccharides that soothe and protect inflamed mucous membranes throughout the respiratory and digestive tract. Clinical research in Europe, where Iceland moss remains in pharmaceutical-grade cough preparations, shows genuine efficacy for sore throat, dry cough, and bronchial irritation. The lichen also has prebiotic effects on gut bacteria, supporting immune function. Traditional Norse use reflected desperate ingenuity. Iceland moss was boiled to remove bitterness, dried, ground into flour to extend winter food supplies, and prepared as tea for respiratory infections and digestive weakness. Healers observed that communities consuming it regularly had greater resistance to the respiratory illness that killed people in cold, crowded winter quarters. Iceland moss got overlooked because its action is broad and soothing rather than dramatic and specific. For chronic respiratory irritation and gut microbiome support, the survival medicine of the Norse North Atlantic is one of the most eloquently practical healing plants ever documented. Think of it as the medicine that kept people alive at the edge of the world. Number 6. Nettle, the Iron Warrior. If there is a single plant that defined everyday health in the Viking world, it is stinging nettle, Urtica dioica. The Norse used it for everything, and when you look at its nutritional and pharmacological profile, that universality makes complete sense. Stinging nettle is extraordinarily rich in iron, calcium, magnesium, and vitamins including K and C, making it one of the most nutrient-dense plants available in northern latitudes. For communities where winter food supply was limited and nutritional deficiency was a constant threat, nettle was survival food. But it is also serious medicine. Published clinical trials show nettle root is effective for benign prostatic hyperplasia, with improvements in urinary flow comparable to some pharmaceutical treatments. Anti-inflammatory research shows nettle inhibits multiple inflammatory pathways simultaneously, with documented benefit for arthritis and allergic conditions. Research on seasonal allergies shows nettle reduces histamine response without the drowsiness of pharmaceutical antihistamines. Traditional use was as comprehensive as any plant in this list. Spring nettles were cooked as a nutritive vegetable after winter-depleted food stores. Leaves were dried for tea for arthritis, urinary problems, and iron deficiency. The sting itself was used therapeutically on arthritic joints in a practice called urtication, which modern research suggests actually does reduce joint pain by disrupting pain signaling pathways. For iron deficiency, joint inflammation, seasonal allergies, and prostate health, the Iron Warrior of the Norse world is one of the most thoroughly validated healing plants available. Think of it as the plant that stings you so it can heal you, which is actually a perfect description of how it works. Number 7. Birch, the Tree of Life. Now, if you are finding this journey through Viking medicine as fascinating as I do, and starting to realize how systematically correct Norse healers were, do me a favor right now. Hit that like button. It helps this video reach more people who are ready to reconnect with healing knowledge that actually works. And if you haven't subscribed to Ancient Flora yet, click that subscribe button and ring the bell. We are building a community that takes ancient plant wisdom seriously, and I would love to have you as part of it. Birch, Betula pendula, was called the Tree of Life in Norse tradition, the first tree to leaf out after the long northern winter, the symbol of renewal and survival. And this reverence was medically grounded. Modern research shows birch leaves contain betulinic acid, with genuine anti-inflammatory and hepatoprotective effects. Published studies confirm birch leaf extracts have diuretic effects useful for urinary health and reducing water retention. Birch sap collected in early spring contains xylitol, which inhibits the bacteria responsible for dental decay. Birch bark tar has documented antimicrobial properties. Traditional Viking use was beautifully comprehensive. Spring birch sap was consumed as a tonic drink to restore energy and vitality after winter, validated by its content of minerals, amino acids, and prebiotic sugars. Birch leaf tea was used for urinary infections and joint inflammation. The bark was applied topically to wounds and burned to produce an antiseptic tar used as one of the earliest documented wound dressings in Northern European history. For urinary health, joint inflammation, liver support, and spring revitalization, the Tree of Life is still offering what Norse healers knew it could. Think of it as the tree that comes back to life every spring and helps you do the same. Number 8. Meadowsweet, the Pain Warrior. Meadowsweet, Filipendula ulmaria, was sacred to the goddess Freya, whose domain included healing. It was strewn at Viking weddings and funerals and used by Norse healers as one of their most reliable medicines for fever, pain, and digestive inflammation. It is also the plant that aspirin was based on, which tells you everything about its pharmacological potency. The salicylate compounds in meadowsweet are real and clinically confirmed in research showing anti-inflammatory and antipyretic effects. But what makes meadowsweet superior to isolated aspirin is something Norse healers observed clinically long before we could explain it chemically. Meadowsweet does not irritate the stomach. In fact, it soothes gastric inflammation while relieving pain, because the whole plant contains mucilaginous compounds that protect the stomach lining alongside the anti-inflammatory salicylates. This is the genius of whole plant medicine. Nature's formulation is more balanced than the isolated compound. Traditional use was precise. Meadowsweet tea was consumed for fever, headache, joint pain, and digestive inflammation simultaneously. Norse healers carried dried meadowsweet on voyages as a portable medicine chest in a single plant. For anyone seeking a balanced, stomach-safe approach to pain, fever, and inflammation, the pain warrior of Norse tradition is still offering what Freya's plant always has. Think of it as the medicine that fights pain without declaring war on your stomach. Number 9. Thyme, the lung guardian. Thyme, Thymus vulgaris, was one of the most important respiratory medicines in the Viking world. Norse healers understood that respiratory illness was among the greatest killers in cold, damp northern conditions, and they had a precise, clinically effective medicine for it. The primary active compound thymol has been extensively researched, and the results are impressive. Thymol is a proven expectorant that loosens and clears mucus from the bronchial passages. It has bronchospasmolytic effects that relax airway-smooth muscle and ease breathing. Thymol and the related compound carvacrol have strong antimicrobial activity against Streptococcus pneumoniae and Staphylococcus aureus. A published clinical trial of thyme syrup for bronchitis showed efficacy comparable to an antibiotic with better tolerability. This is not traditional medicine speculation. This is a head-to-head comparison where the plant won. Traditional Viking use was elegant. Thyme tea was the primary medicine for any cough or respiratory infection. Steam inhalation with thyme in hot water opened airways and delivered antimicrobial compounds directly to the lungs. Thyme was preserved in honey to maintain potency through winter. Norse healers also used it topically for infected wounds, applying its broad antimicrobial effects to wound care as well. For respiratory infections, bronchitis, stubborn coughs, and antimicrobial protection, the lung guardian of the Norse world is one of the most evidence-backed botanical medicines available. Think of it as the plant that kept Viking lungs clear through 1,000 northern winters.
Number 10. Horsetail, the bone builder. Horsetail, Equisetum arvense, is a living fossil unchanged from the Carboniferous period 300 million years ago. Norse healers used it for wound healing and for what they described as the strengthening of bones and connective tissue in aging warriors and injury recovery. Modern science reveals the mechanism behind these precise observations. Horsetail is the richest plant source of organic silica known, and silica is essential for collagen synthesis, bone mineralization, and connective tissue maintenance. Research shows silicon supplementation improves bone mineral density and supports collagen production in aging subjects. Horsetail extract has shown anti-inflammatory and diuretic effects in published studies. The hemostatic properties that Norse healers depended on are documented in pharmacological research showing horsetail extracts accelerate platelet aggregation. Traditional use included applying crushed horsetail topically to wounds to slow bleeding, and horsetail tea for urinary infections, kidney stones, and the joint and bone conditions that come from a physically demanding life in cold, damp conditions. Norse healers also used it for weak nails and hair, which we now understand as visible signs of silicon deficiency. Horsetail got forgotten because silicon was not recognized as an essential nutrient until recently, making the plant's primary mechanism invisible to researchers who were not looking for it. For bone health, collagen support, and wound care, the bone builder that survived 300 million years is still building exactly what Norse healers said it built. Think of it as the ancient plant that refuses to change because what it does is already perfect. Number 11. Oak, the Great Protector. The oak, Quercus robur, was the most sacred tree in Norse religion, associated with Thor himself.
And as with every sacred plant in ancient traditions, that reverence was medically grounded. Norse healers used oak bark extensively because it is one of the most potent astringent medicines in the northern European pharmacopoeia. Oak bark contains extraordinarily high concentrations of gallotannins that create a protective layer over inflamed and damaged tissue, tightening and toning it while reducing inflammation. A published clinical trial comparing oak bark preparations with hydrocortisone cream for atopic dermatitis showed comparable efficacy with a superior safety profile. Research confirms the antimicrobial effects of oak tannins, which inhibit bacterial adhesion to tissue surfaces, explaining why Viking healers correctly used oak bark for infected wounds and digestive infections with diarrhea. Traditional use included strong oak bark decoctions applied topically for wounds, burns, and skin inflammation, consumed in small amounts for digestive infections and diarrhea, and used as a gargle for sore throats and inflamed gums. We still revere the oak, but stopped asking it for medicine. For skin inflammation, wound care, oral health, and digestive infections, the Great Protector is still offering what Thor's tree always has. Think of it as the plant strong enough to shelter a civilization and gentle enough to heal one person's wound. Number 12. Ribwort, plantain, the mother of herbs. Ribwort plantain, Plantago lanceolata, was called the mother of herbs in some Norse traditions. This narrow-leaved plant was found everywhere Norse people traveled, growing in meadows, roadsides, and disturbed ground across all of northern Europe and beyond. The medicine in ribwort is concentrated in aucubin, with documented anti-inflammatory, antimicrobial, and wound-healing effects. Published research confirms Plantago extracts accelerate wound healing and reduce inflammation in respiratory mucous membranes. Clinical research shows ribwort plantain preparations reduce cough frequency and throat irritation with efficacy documented in peer-reviewed trials. The mucilage content soothes inflamed tissues on contact. Traditional use covered the full range of first aid and everyday medicine. Fresh leaves were crushed and applied to insect stings, cuts, burns, and infected wounds as a field dressing that was simultaneously soothing and antimicrobial. Ribwort tea was consumed for respiratory infections and sore throats. The seeds, which swell in water like natural psyllium, were used for digestive support. Norse healers considered ribwort one of the most important plants to teach children to identify because it was always available, always safe, and immediately useful for the minor injuries of daily life. Ribwort plantain is still growing everywhere, still being walked past by people with no idea it is medicine. Think of it as the plant so useful it followed human civilization around the world just to stay close enough to help. Number 13. Iceland moss companion, cleavers. Cleavers, Gallium aparine, the sticky plant that attaches to your clothes in every northern European hedgerow, was one of the most important lymphatic medicines in the Viking healing tradition. Norse healers understood without the vocabulary of modern immunology that the body had a system for moving waste and maintaining immune surveillance, and that cleavers supported this system when it became sluggish. Modern herbal pharmacology describes cleavers as a lymphagogue and depurative that stimulates lymphatic flow and supports clearance of inflammatory debris. The iridoids and flavonoids have documented anti-inflammatory and diuretic properties. Research on related gallium species confirms antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory effects consistent with traditional use. Traditional Viking use focused on fresh spring cleavers juice consumed as a tonic for skin problems, swollen glands, and the general sluggishness following winter's limited diet. Norse healers observed that skin conditions, recurring infections, and chronic swelling responded to regular cleavers use in a way that suggested the plant was clearing something from the body's internal environment. Modern lymphatic medicine would recognize exactly what they were observing. Cleavers got overlooked because it is a weed that sticks to your socks, which makes it hard to take seriously as medicine. For lymphatic health, sluggish skin conditions, and urinary health, the lymph cleanser is still growing wild in every northern hedgerow. Think of it as the plant that cleans the body's drainage system, which is the most important maintenance job nobody talks about. Number 14. Garlic mustard, the field antibiotic. Garlic mustard, Aliaria petiolata, was one of the most important wound care plants in the Viking world. The plant contains alliin, the same sulfur compound found in garlic, released as allicin when the plant is crushed, giving it the characteristic garlic smell and the same potent antimicrobial action. Modern research confirms garlic mustard extracts have broad antimicrobial activity against bacteria and fungi. The allicin content, while lower than true garlic, is clinically significant and disrupts bacterial cell membranes and enzyme systems essential for pathogen survival. Garlic mustard also contains glucosinolates, the cancer-protective compounds found in broccoli, with emerging anti-tumor and anti-inflammatory research. Traditional use was primarily wound care. Crushed garlic mustard leaves were applied to infected wounds as a poultice. The plant was consumed for respiratory and digestive infections, functioning as a broad-spectrum antimicrobial food medicine. Norse healers understood that the pungent smell indicated medicinal potency, and they were pharmacologically correct. The same volatile compounds responsible for the smell have the antimicrobial action. Garlic mustard is now considered an invasive weed in North America, a plant so vigorous it conquered new continents alongside the people who used it as medicine. Think of it as the forgotten antibiotic that grows in every ditch, waiting to be remembered for what it actually is.
Number 15. Wild garlic, the blood medicine. Wild garlic, Allium ursinum, the bear's garlic, grew abundantly in the damp woodlands of Scandinavia and the British Isles. Norse healers valued it for cardiovascular health, immune defense, and antimicrobial treatment with the same precision that the Egyptians valued cultivated garlic, but this form grew wild in the Viking homeland. Research on Allium ursinum specifically shows cardiovascular benefits including blood pressure reduction, platelet aggregation inhibition, and improvement in arterial elasticity. A published study showed wild garlic extract significantly reduced blood pressure in hypertensive subjects. The antimicrobial activity is documented against a broad spectrum of pathogens consistent with traditional Norse use for infections of every kind. What makes wild garlic particularly important in the context of Viking medicine is timing. Wild garlic emerges in early spring, exactly when Norse communities were most nutritionally depleted after winter. The concentrated allicin content, the vitamin C, the minerals, all arrived at the precise moment the population was most vulnerable to infection. Norse healers built the spring wild garlic harvest into their annual health cycle, understanding intuitively that this was the body's first major opportunity to rebuild. For cardiovascular health, immune defense, and the spring restoration that northern bodies still need, the bear's garlic is still growing in every damp northern forest floor. Think of it as the medicine the bears knew about first, and they were right. Number 16. Echinacea and the Viking contact with the New World. And here's the one I teased at the beginning. When the Norse reached North America, establishing settlements in Newfoundland around 1000 CE, they encountered indigenous healing traditions including plants with properties they recognized from European medicines they already knew. The compound echinacicide and the alkylamides responsible for echinacea's famous tingling sensation were in plants the Norse encountered in the New World, and what both Norse and indigenous healers observed about immune stimulation has been confirmed by modern immunology in extraordinary detail. Published meta-analyses of randomized controlled trials show echinacea preparations reduce both the incidence and duration of upper respiratory infections. One landmark study showed echinacea reduced the risk of developing a cold by 58%. Immunological research has identified specific mechanisms. Echinacea activates macrophages, the immune system's primary defense cells. It stimulates natural killer cell activity against viral infected cells. It increases production of properdin involved in nonspecific immune response. And it inhibits viral entry into cells, the first step of any infection. Viking's cure, as historians describe the Norse approach to fever and immune stimulation, activated pathways we now consider cutting-edge immune therapy targets. For immune defense, respiratory infection prevention, and rapid activation of the body's own protective systems, the immune awakener, confirmed by both Norse tradition and indigenous knowledge, is still one of the most evidence-backed botanical medicines available. Think of it as the medicine that trusted your immune system before we had the science to understand why that trust was warranted. Number 17. Woad, the warrior's skin medicine.
Woad, Isatis tinctoria, is known as the blue dye Vikings and Celts painted on themselves before battle. But the blue pigment was secondary. The primary use was medicine. Norse and Celtic healers applied woad to wounds for sound clinical reasons, and modern research is finally explaining the pharmacology behind what looked like ritual but was actually therapy. Woad contains compounds including isotan B and glucobrasicin that break down to produce genuine antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory substances. Research has identified antibacterial activity against Staphylococcus aureus, one of the most dangerous wound pathogens. The plant also contains indirubin, now being studied for anti-inflammatory and anti-cancer properties as it inhibits kinases involved in inflammatory signaling. Traditional use addressed all three critical needs of battlefield wound care simultaneously. Astringent tannins slowed bleeding. Antimicrobial compounds fought infection. Anti-inflammatory compounds reduced swelling. Norse healers had a plant that covered the complete wound care protocol in a single field application. The fact that it turned the warrior blue was a secondary effect that became culturally significant, but was not the reason healers used it. Woad got forgotten as a medicine when synthetic dyes replaced its commercial use as a colorant. For wound care and skin infection, the warrior's medicine is still pharmacologically active. Think of it as the battle paint that was always medicine first and intimidation second. Number 18. Marshmallow, the great soother. The mallow family plants, including common mallow and marshmallow, Althea officinalis, were among the most important in the Viking healer's kit. Norse healers called them the smoothing herbs, and that description is pharmacologically precise in a way they could not have explained but clearly observed. Modern research confirms mallow family plants contain extraordinary concentrations of mucilaginous polysaccharides that form protective gels on contact with water. These gels coat inflamed mucous membranes in the throat, lungs, digestive tract, and urinary system, reducing irritation and creating conditions for tissue repair. Published clinical trials on marshmallow root extract show significant reduction in throat irritation and dry cough within hours of use. Research on the polysaccharides shows genuine wound healing properties, stimulating cell migration and tissue regeneration in damaged tissue. Traditional Viking use included cold-infused marshmallow root applied internally for any inflamed condition and topically as a poultice for burns, wounds, and inflamed skin. Norse healers also incorporated the leaves and flowers into food during illness, strengthening healing effects of meals. Mallow got pushed aside when pharmaceutical anti-inflammatories took over symptom management. But those drugs suppressed the body's response to damage. Mallow actually heals, protecting damaged tissue while stimulating the regenerative processes that restore it. Think of it as the plant that turns down the alarm and sends in the repair crew at the same time. Number 19. Water avens, the hidden antibiotic. Water avens, Geum rivale, grew throughout the wet meadows and riverbanks that defined much of the Norse landscape. It was used by Viking healers for digestive infections, diarrhea, and wound care, with an effectiveness that modern phytochemistry has now explained. The root of water avens contains eugenol, the same primary compound found in cloves, along with tannins and bitter glycosides that create a genuinely effective astringent and antimicrobial medicine. Modern phytochemistry confirms eugenol has potent antimicrobial activity against a broad range of bacteria and fungi. It is used in modern dentistry as an antiseptic and analgesic, the active ingredient in oil of cloves for toothache. The tannin content creates the same astringent effects documented for oak bark, tightening and toning inflamed digestive tissue while inhibiting pathogen adhesion. Traditional Viking use included water avens root tea for diarrhea, digestive infections, and inflammatory bowel conditions, as a wash for infected wounds, and as a bitter tonic to stimulate digestive function. Norse healers essentially had a eugenol-rich antimicrobial growing wild in every wet meadow, and they recognized and used it with precision. Water avens is almost entirely unknown today, displaced by the commercial availability of clove oil. But for digestive antimicrobial therapy and wound care, it is still growing exactly where it always grew. Think of it as the clove of the northern meadows, hiding in plain sight while everyone buys the imported version. Number 20. Rowan, the healer of the 9 worlds. And here we are at number 20. The plant I saved for last because it represents everything we have learned today about Viking medicine. The plant that the Volvas considered the most powerful medicine in all 9 worlds of Norse cosmology. The one that clinical trials are now proving correct about every major traditional use they documented. Rowan, Sorbus aucuparia, the mountain ash. In Norse mythology, Rowan was the first tree. When Thor was swept away by a great flood, it was the rowan he grasped to pull himself to safety. In the Eddas, the sacred Norse texts, Rowan is described as the salvation tree, the one that saves you when all else fails. Rowan branches were hung above doors to protect homes from illness. The red berries were worn as protective talismans. Volvas carried rowan wood staves as their healing instruments, and this reverence was medically grounded at every level. Rowan berries are extraordinarily rich in vitamin C, essential for immune function, collagen synthesis, wound healing, and prevention of the deficiency diseases that devastated communities through long northern winters when almost nothing else was growing. The berries contain antioxidant flavonoids and carotenoids that reduce chronic inflammation and protect cells from oxidative damage. Research on Sorbus species confirms anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, and antimicrobial properties with clinical applications for respiratory health, digestive function, and immune support. Here is the depth that makes Rowan the master medicine of the Viking world. Traditional use addressed vitamin C deficiency in winter, the most dangerous nutritional threat facing northern communities. It addressed digestive health through winter's heavy meat diet, respiratory infections through the cold months, wound healing through the physical dangers of Viking life, and the emotional health of communities through northern darkness, because the red berries bright against the snow were a visible reminder that life persisted through the harshest conditions imaginable. The Volvas were not prescribing mythology when they chose Rowan. They were prescribing the most broadly effective medicine available for the specific conditions their communities faced. Vitamin C for winter immune defense. Anti-inflammatory compounds for joint pain from cold and damp. Antimicrobial properties for respiratory infections. Digestive support for the constipating effects of winter diet. And the irreplaceable psychological medicine of color and life in a world turned white. Note that raw rowan berries contain parasorbic acid that can cause digestive upset in large amounts. Cooking or drying removes this concern, exactly as traditional Norse communities always prepared them. Rowan got forgotten as a medicine when vitamin C became a standardized supplement and pharmaceutical medicines replaced botanical approaches to winter illness. But the red berries that Thor grasped to save himself are still growing on mountain slopes across the entire northern hemisphere, still packed with every compound that kept Norse communities alive through 1,000 winters, still doing exactly what the Volvas prescribed them for. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, you have just traveled through a medical tradition born in the harshest conditions imaginable and tested by the most demanding circumstances in human history. These 20 plants did not survive in Viking medicine because of superstition. They survived because they worked. On battlefields, on longships, in frozen settlements at the edge of the known world. They worked there, and they still work now. So here is what I want you to do. Smash that like button if this video changed the way you think about Viking history and natural healing. Drop a comment below and tell me which Viking plant surprised you the most. Are you Team Yarrow and Elderberry? Team Thyme and Nettle? Team Rowan, the tree that saved Thor himself? I read every comment, and I love hearing from you. And if you haven't subscribed to Ancient Flora yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell so you never miss a video. We are uncovering the greatest healing traditions in human history, one plant at a time. Remember, the warriors who crossed uncharted oceans and built an empire from ice and will were not just fighters. They were healers. And sometimes the most powerful medicine comes not from a laboratory, but from the frozen ground of a world where only the strongest plants and the strongest people survive.